So here we go. So tradition. What is tradition? Tradition are these things that we pass along from generation to generation. And tradition is what gives meaning to our lives. And tradition certainly is what gives meaning to any faith. And I appreciate all your fanning, so we can just have this as part of our tradition of our service. See, we're talking about a lot of faiths that were originated in the Middle East, so we're having the experience a little warmer there sometimes, right? We're giving you all the deal. So, we apologize, our blowers are doing whatever they're doing. But anyway, it's on correction. But tradition, we're here in the middle of our experience of the series of world religions and looking for the wisdom that is within each world religion. We've looked at the Islam faith, we've looked at the Buddhist faith, we've looked at the Hindu faith, and I hope as you continue to show up, we recognize that there's an aspect of each one of these faiths that we're incorporating right here. We have from the Islam faith our call to worship, as they call from their minarets. We have our meditation from the Buddhist tradition. And I noticed I'm doing yoga, which is a bit of the Hindu tradition. And certainly, any of us ever say namaste, right from the Hindu faith. So today, we're talking about Judaism. And I didn't really think I was going to be part of this series. Duke said we were going to do this series. I thought, this is great. I really wasn't slated for any of these talks. And then he said, well, why don't you do July 10th? And I looked it up what it was. It was Judaism. And I went, what do I say? Oy vey. I didn't know much about the Jewish faith. I've been exposed and very honored to be around Jewish people in my life, and that's a lot of how I've learned about this faith. But as you know, the best part of being around people of whatever faith is to be around the people. We can study it all day long, but how a faith comes alive is to be around the people of that faith and understand what brings them meaning. Now, I have traveled to Israel, and I've been to the Wailing Wall and seen many of the sites in Jerusalem. But if you really want to know about the Jewish people, you just have to live in South Florida. And that's where I lived for 8 years, and especially on the East Coast, and it's a lot of the Jewish folks from New York. So it's a very passionate group of people, and it was a wonderful period of time living there. Now, I lived in the Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale area, which is, at Christmas time, you don't see many trees. You see a lot of menorahs. And I learned so much about the faith and this experience of the connection of people to their Creator. And one of the things that I learned from this series and that we're working with is that we're not separated. If we celebrate diversity, that we say we do here, is that we think that we're separated because of our differences, but we're not separated because of our differences. We're separated by our judgment of our differences. So part of this conversation about the world and faith is how do we get into this place of oneness, that we're all here to understand one another. And you have to bring a little humor into this understanding because we are part of all faiths. And my friends in Fort Lauderdale taught me a lot about that. I worked at Unity of Fort Lauderdale for years. I was in every aspect except for minister. I did all kinds of things at Unity of Fort Lauderdale, and it was a wonderful experience. But on Friday nights, because of the large Jewish community there, we had a Jewish service and I was the wedding coordinator, so I would usually move out the bride and groom and the family on Friday night that we'd been rehearsing, and this Jewish group would come in, and they had their tambourines and their cantor, and they were a lively group of people, and they were led by Rabbi Frank. And Rabbi Frank and I would usually exchange hellos on our way in or out. And he said to me one of these Friday nights, he said, Heidi, the most interesting thing happened just last week. And I said, really? And he said, yes, our church in Unity of Fort Lauderdale, I always called it a single aisle church. I worked on the plane too long, airplane. So it was a single aisle church. And at the back of the seats was a pane of glass, the kind of smoky glass, and in it were crosses because the church had been built many years before, and they put crosses in the glass. And he said one of his congregants had come up during the service and said, Rabbi Frank, how can we have church here? How can we have a service here? There's crosses in that glass. And he said, those aren't crosses. Those are T for Torah. And I said, Rabbi Frank, I like you. You see the oneness. You've allowed it to be something else, and something that included this person. And it was such a fascinating experience of standing there with him going, how do we see this? How do we know this oneness? And if we say that Jesus is one of our master teachers and presenters, we know that Jesus came from the Jewish faith. So there's going to be a little of this faith in what we do. And in looking at this faith, I was amazed at how it resonates in my life. Now, the part of the Jewish faith that I want to be with today in our conversation, because this could be, of course, a year-long series, is the mystical aspect of Judaism, the theology of Judaism, which is called the Kabbalah. And I'll tell you what Kabbalah is and what Kabbalah isn't. Kabbalah is the Jewish faith's understanding of God. It's the understanding of God's experience with the world. And finally, it's the understanding of these unseen forces that seem to work with life. What Kabbalah is not is some new age philosophy. It's not popular just because a lot of Hollywood stars think it's a great thing to do. It's not superstition, and it's not an easy path to bliss. It is a philosophy. It is a way of understanding spiritual law. So in looking at the Kabbalah, there were three aspects to the Kabbalah that were outstanding and as I was looking at it, and certainly applicable as we're practicing how to be one on this beautiful planet on which we live. And the first is that God, the creation, is within us. That God is the one and is creation, and we are part of that creation. And secondly, that we want to bless everything, that everything has a purpose. And finally, that you have plenty of time. You're never going to run out of time, all right? So in looking at creation, looking at what we're up to, why we're here, the question was, why did God create the world? Why did God create this earth? And in the Kabbalah view, they say, why did God create the earth? God didn't need to create the earth. They believe God is a oneness and allness, so God doesn't need anything. That the creation of the earth was an expression of love to assist humans in learning how to receive the greatest pleasure of life. The greatest pleasure of life. And you know what the greatest pleasure of life is? The knowledge of God. That this experience of this planet was to allow humans to learn to receive this manifestation that is you and this life experience, and to recognize that the earth wasn't created in 7 days. The creation is happening every moment. And how do you think it's happening? Through you, Winnie, and through you, Graham, and through you, Lauren. You know, it's through our ideas, it's through our passion, it's through our interest. This is how creation keeps happening. And I really love that this was an act of love for us to learn to receive. Because we're usually talking about giving all the time. Have you noticed that it's all about give, and you'll receive? But the idea of recognizing that we've already received by just being who you are, and by recognizing that you are part of this world awakening. And when we recognize that and we allow ourselves to be full with that, we get that we give from this abundance and this ever-flowing cup that is who we are. And so we recognize that we forget that sometimes, and we can get into a place of feeling separate from, remember the judgment of feeling separate from, rather than one with. That's why the idea of any kind of tithing or offering comes at the end of a service, because the idea is that you're spiritually fed, and you come from the place of feeling full that we want to give back. So often we've got to learn how to receive. There's a story of a rabbi that lived up on a mountain. He was one of these wise men that people came and they would just sit and listen for a word that he would say. Very much like Duke. He's always like, I'm going to keep him awake back there. And so, they'd wait for a word. Hi, y'all. Oh, I'm so glad y'all are here. This is a couple with a baby that's so well. Anyway, they would sit and wait for a word. And sometimes this wise man would just make a gesture and people would get what they needed. And so he was up on this hill for years. He was, a rabbi that had been, really just, he's the wisest guy in the area. Well, there we go. Now we got wise guy, a whole other thing. But the people came, so some of his followers came and they heard a strange sound one day. They heard this man repenting and crying on the other side of the hill. And they went and looked at him and they said, "You're our wise man, you're our holy man. How are you repenting and crying?" And he said, "Let me tell you a story about something I learned. I was up here being honored and exalted for so many years, and I realized that I wasn't being of service to God by feeling higher than other people." And he said, and I recognized that to serve God, to serve this creation that is who we are, we must be about joy. And he said, without humility, I couldn't be about joy. So I needed to leave this high place, and he said, I put on a disguise of regular clothes, and I went out into the world to just be with the people. And he said, I went to an inn, and I stayed at this place in my disguise. The innkeeper was so kind to me, and then I left. But he said, some of my followers were coming after me to find out where I was, and they went to the innkeeper, and they said, this wise man was just here. And the innkeeper said, oh, no. The wise man couldn't have been here. I would have recognized him. And they said, no, he's in a disguise, and he's in exile trying to find out who he is around humans. And so the innkeeper said, and they described the man being in disguise. The innkeeper thought, oh, no, he has been here. And he ran after the wise man, and he found him. And he said, why didn't you tell me who you were? I would have treated you completely differently. And in that moment, the wise man said, I realized my time of exile was over, and I came back to my mountain, and every day, at the end of my day, I take time to repent and to cry and to recognize that if I would have thought all day about my connection to this God source, I would have treated myself and my life completely differently. So I wonder, when you get that you are creation, you are part of the world waking up, would you treat your life completely differently? When we understand that the greatest pleasure is this knowledge of God, would we treat our life completely differently? Because some people, when I say the greatest pleasure, we would think that would be having the perfect relationship or the perfect job or a lot of money or a perfect body or whatever we think the greatest pleasure is. But what if the greatest pleasure is to know God? So I invite you to just be with that idea, because this experience of Judaism has been going on. They said Kabbalah started 974 generations ago, so a little while ago. They said that God looked into the Torah and created this world. So this is old thinking, but it's not. It's our thinking. We call ourselves, we say we're one with all that is. And I just invite us to recognize that you are part of creation happening. And secondly, that we want to bless everything. Do you bless everything? I mean, some things, it's easy to bless things when things are going well. I was with this couple this week, and their baby was really sick. It's hard to bless that. But to recognize, as we talked, that this love experience of this little baby being there was bringing more love to all of us as we were there in the neonatal unit. That how do we bless everything that's happening in our lives? Because as we do, this blessing muscle starts to increase, and then when things come into your life that feel huge, you can work with them. You can be with them. You can be that blessing that you are.